Where are we? We just finished 6, and now we're moving on to, we're going to talk about worship and sacraments and the Directory for Public Worship, which nobody on this podcast has strong opinions about at all. Number 5 from Calvary, grant BCO 60 through 63. That's not 60-63 for those of you who may be reading it. It's 60, 61, 62, and 63, 4 chapters of the BCO, full constitutional status. And the most fascinating part about this overture to me is that it is less than 1 page. It wants to grant full constitutional authority to 4 chapters, and it is not even a page long. There's just a bunch of whereases, and the therefore is 2.5 lines. So, what do we think, fellas?
I can kind of see why they did this. If you're thinking we should start working on the Directory for Worship and getting it to a place in which it's functional in our book, these are fairly uncontroversial chapters. Although when you get into the details, it would be nice to revise some of these things. I've seen suggestions too of maybe a couple of these chapters about like the sick should be in the appendix rather than having a full chapter. So I think what this would do is like if these are uncontroversial enough that you think you should start with them, that's good. But if you think that things need to be revised if we're going to tackle the directory, then you may be more inclined to look at 26 or something different, a different process, or just nothing altogether. I tend to like the idea of a directory, but I think it needs revision. And so just to adopt these without revision, I think is going to have a bit of pushback.
Yeah, and just so folks know, the chapters we're talking about are visitation of the sick, burial of the dead, days of fasting and thanksgiving, and Christian life in the home. The last 4 chapters of our Book of Church Order.
Nothing, Alex?
Nothing? Is 26 where the real debate is? Is that?
Yeah, I think I'm with Jared that if we're going to do constitutionalization of these chapters, they need revision. Dr. Coffin, I believe, pointed out several of the issues with these particular chapters, which are of the Directory for Worship. These are probably the least controversial, and yet there's still problems innate to making them as is into constitutional provisions, because they're not as clear as they need to be, because they restrict things in unhelpful ways. As I say, I would not want to just carte blanche or just drop these into the constitutional portion without any amendments or edits to what's here.
Yeah. Alex, you and I haven't talked about this before, so I don't know. This is not me asking any kind of leading question. I really am curious. Where do you fall on the idea of they're not constitutional, so there may not be a point in revising them, would be one side, and the other side would be, well, we should revise them after they've been made constitutional. I mean, or is it some combination of revise them as we're making them constitutional? I'm just curious where your thoughts are on all that.
I think the question there is it a good idea to have a constitutional directory for worship?
Yeah, okay.
If it is, then first we've got to fix them so that they're usable and not contradictory, and then make them constitutional. If we make them constitutional, then we just break the Constitution for a little while until we get a chance to fix the thing. Yeah. And that's not helpful.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. That's a helpful thought. 26. Everybody all right?
Which is why we should talk about 26.
Yeah, for sure. From Northwest Georgia, erect an ad interim committee to revise the Directory for Worship for authoritative use. So, there's a lot here. Let me see. Down in the resolves, form an ad hoc committee to finish the work of revising the directory that not yet given full authority in accordance with Scripture and the standards for authoritative use in the PCA according to the rules of the BCO, utilizing various NAPARC denominations directories, including scriptural confessional references, present various chapters of the GA for adoption until the work is complete. And then there's language about how it is to be established as well, and then a provision down there about the finances. So I know there's been a lot of chatter about this. I've been out of these conversations generally for the last little while, so I'm going to rely on you guys to kind of lead us through the thoughts on this particular overture.
Just before we actually talk about this overture, I will point out that we're only allowed to approve 2 ad interim committees in any given GA, or at any given time total. We have at least 3 and possibly more, depending on how you divide up the Christian nationalism ones.
Yeah.
We have at least 3 that have been proposed. So if we give approval to this, that necessarily means at least one of the others has to be answered in the negative.
And I gotta give you the response from the AC, which is it's also more difficult to approve these because you have to amend the budget. That's what the advice of the AC is. If there's not already stipulated funding for a study committee, then the budget of the actual denomination needs to be amended, which is by a 2/3 vote. We've had weird approaches in the past, but that's currently the clerk's advice on the issue. And so he argues that 2/3 of the assembly needs to approve any study committee if there's no funding already presented. And so you could, I mean, that might even be debatable on top of all that.
Yeah, that's. I think these committees tried to copy the language from other proposals in the past, and so this seems to be a new take on it to say that there'd be a 2/3 and you have to change the budget.
Am I remembering correctly that in the last couple of years we changed the provisions for ad interim committees to require that the budgeting be included in there and not just, oh, well, the AC will pay for it from whatever. And maybe that, I wonder if that's kind of where that's coming from.
Yeah, I think it's RAO 9.3, and yeah, it's just whether or not designating it would be gifts counts, or if it's saying, well, you can't guarantee the gifts are actually going to come in.
AIC requested this year that specifically said it was an unfunded one. There will be no monies allocated to this. It's just an interesting choice.
Yeah, which could be a question on this. Do you need much more than a Zoom account to do some of this work? Well, this is an interesting provision in that it gets into the revising. If we get into the substance of this, it gets into the revising of the directory in order to bring it into constitutional status. There are provisions within the BCO already that seem to assume that the directory is constitutional when it tells sessions to govern worship in 12.5. It tells them to use the directory. I think it assumed that it would have been approved at a certain point. So it leads to interesting questions. This actually came up in an SJC case in which it had to do with what a session could have control over in terms of the benediction and limiting what you can use for that. And this came up because, you know, the benediction is mentioned in the directory, and yet the directory is not constitutional, but the part saying that the session should use a directory is. So how do you use that in your reasoning? So this would allow for it to be revised. I think one thing that this has going for it is that this would draw from a broader cross-section of the PCA, hopefully with the moderator making a committee like this, which hopefully would take away people's pet projects. It seems like we only consider BCO chapters when something happens, like with marriage that was actually approved, but just one section, or with preaching, and then there's some issue behind it rather than drawing on well, what does the PCA actually do? And I think even something that could be in mind if the Overtures Committee wanted to do it is to say, not to make it any more restrictive. I think we've forgotten what a directory is for, which is to be some guidance in creating worship. You think about it now, how does a new church plant or somebody that's come into the PCA, how do they construct a worship service? Probably what they've known before, or they grab Chappell's book, or they grab Terry Johnson's guide. But we don't really have something that the PCA says, this is kind of our broad guidance on this. The pushback comes from those that would say, I don't want to be told narrowly what I do in my service. You know, if you start to get this to a prayer book status of here's your forms, here's exactly how you do it. And I think the big question is who gets to do the leading of worship in certain elements. So the question would be, are you going to tighten that up? Well, you're going to have a certain segment, even if it's small, that's going to be objecting to that. Are you completely silent on it? Do you make allowances for it? So those are going to be the questions that are going to be the more difficult ones. But the current directory we have is from the 1930s, and we don't really read it anyway. Here's my test. Have you ever been into a church and they start with a doxology? That's actually what a directory says to do, which apparently was popular in the 30s, and I haven't seen a single PCA church do it. We probably could have something that would be helpful now. The question just is, overcoming actually setting up a committee, and if you can overcome the fears that people may have of this is narrowing down our practice and you're going to start telling us what we have to do, which I even have from, we don't do offerings as an element of worship. If it was just made constitutional right now with no revisions, well, we're supposed to have that as part of our worship service, and we don't. So I totally understand that. And so there would need to be either the committee or making of this committee that would have provisions for this isn't just to make it more narrow, maybe even to loosen up in a few places.
Okay. Well, still in the area of worship, Overture 12 from Providence Presbytery seeks to amend BCO 58 to specify only officers may distribute the Lord's Supper. So speaking about constitutionality of the directory, this is one of the chapters that is constitutional. And they want to add some language that says, here the bread is to be distributed by the minister or to other officers for distribution, and similar language down for the cup. My just first take is that this is helpful, clarifying language. I think I have had the question come to me several times over the last many years that, hey, who's allowed to help distribute stuff if a church only has a couple of elders and one may be absent on a Sunday? Is a deacon allowed to help distribute the elements? These kinds of questions are helpful. And so while I'm sure that this may have different angles attached to it, I don't know. I think it is a helpful clarification in giving guidance on who can do the supper. But and you guys may know this, I wonder if some of this is coming around because people are worried that churches are having non-ordained individuals help hand out the supper. I don't know if it's meant to clarify or meant to prohibit practices that people don't like, but maybe y'all know better than I do.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that would come up from this is some people have talked about what is distributing the elements. And I actually think part of this is the original BCO didn't make a distinction between administering and distributing. Early Reformation ways of practicing the supper where you come up to the front and you were at like a table and the minister was there. So there was nobody taking the elements from the table somewhere else. Now we sit in the pews. And then the question is, okay, now we're separating administering or instituting from distributing. Where does distributing stop? At the edge of the pew? If you're passing it down the aisle? Some have said, okay, now what if you're handing it to somebody else? My wife hands it to me. Is she distributing the elements? Also, maybe you have a church plant and they have some guys that are training to be officers, but they're not officers yet. So the question I think is ordinarily you're going to want the officers to distribute. Does this make provision for the fact that you may not have that everywhere? The only ordained officer you have is a pastor or something like that. So I think that's where the objections will come in.
The practice of some churches, and I think, I won't say that, but the practice of some churches is not to have the officers be the only ones who walk around with the elements. The officers are very clearly the ones administering, as you mentioned the difference between administering and distributing, but that there are others who are employed in distributing, whether that's a large church and there just aren't enough elders to pass it around or, whatever. I think there's going to be some pushback from that as well, because is it necessary that an officer be the one walking around with a plate? Do we really need the officers to be the ones doing that if they're clearly in the front administering the supper? This feels like using a nuke to swat a fly. I don't like the way that you're doing it in your church, and so I'm going to put in a constitutional provision to say that you're wrong. Maybe I'm overstating there, but that's kind of what this doesn't feel like a constitutional provision matter. And it seems like, as you mentioned, Jared, it's going to create some problems in ways that are much bigger than the one that it's trying to solve.
I don't know. I like the provision. I think the elders are responsible in safeguarding and fencing the table, and perhaps sometimes we take such a hands-off approach where you fence the table generally and let everyone individually decide. And I think elders should be intimately involved with the table, so much so that as they're handing out the elements and distributing them, they know who shall and who shall not get the elements. If you're in the context, say, if like people come up for the supper and neither are ordained officers and they're the ones handing you the bread, they're the ones handing you the wine, they don't know if you're under censure necessarily. Only the elders do. And so I think there is credence for this, and I am, full disclosure, I served under the man who authored this. And so I have, all my disclosures out there. I think it's a fine provision. I think it is not I don't think it has as harsh of a negative result as perhaps shared. I think it's perhaps helpful. And if you don't have the officers necessary, there are other ways you could distribute the elements that require less of a workload, people coming up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it may have some hindrances, but I think it's a good provision, at least theologically, to think through, as officers are in charge of the care of the sheep, even as they distribute the elements.
Yeah. I want to just play around a little bit for a second. You said a lot about elders just there. So would you seek to amend this hypothetically on Overtures to change it from officers to elders?
No.
Yeah. Our deacons don't always know who's under censure necessarily, depending on how public we've chosen to make it. So I'm playing with you.
Yeah, I think if you're thinking through those kind of issues, I would feel much more comfortable sharing an issue with the deacon that we're having than my 7-year-old kid or my wife, even, for that matter. And so I think deacons can be cued in. I mean, we had an issue at Providence where it was a very intimate session issue, but there were also physical issues that we had to have concerns about in the congregation. And so we warned the deacons ahead of time, hey, we're dealing with an issue. We're not going to get into the details of it, but we think for the preservation of the safety of those in the church that you should know about X. And so I think I'm more comfortable with sharing intimate details with deacons on a need-to-know basis than that 21-year-old girl or that father who's not an officer. I don't know. That's my personal gut on
it. I think you both make really good cases for the wisdom of this practice. It's just the question is going to be is if putting it in as a constitutional requirement can satisfy all of the minor exceptions, or you're training somebody to be an elder. Do they help distribute? Can the session choose to do that? All of these different things that people can imagine. There's like, okay, how do you make a provision that takes into account all of those different things? So that's going to be the objection that it has. Everybody may be, or 90% of people may say this is the wise way to go, but how do we put that into our Constitution in a way that makes allowances for those situations that we come up with?
I didn't think this would be one of the ones that I'd really, really have to think about, but I think I'm going to have to really think about this one.
The issue that I have is having ministered in destitute areas. You can easily, especially out west in the Pacific Northwest, you can find yourself in a situation where you just don't have very much access to elders or deacons for that matter. And does that mean that we then require men to fly in, especially in Alaska, to be able to serve the meal every month? I mean, that seems an undue burden.
Will you be there?
Say it again?
You'd be there, and you just have people come up.
Which is great if your church is 30 or 35. It gets a little more complicated if you've got 75 or 100 and just haven't particularized yet. Anyway, all of that to say, my hesitation is with, admittedly, probably a fringe case there, but one that I think we need to be aware of, that it's easy for the PCA in the Southeast, in the East, not to know nearly as well, because the West is kind of forgotten most of the time.
Yeah, it's good. What was that? 12. Okay. Let's keep cruising. We're not doing bad in terms of time. It's gonna be long, but it's not bad. Let's go to 19 and 33. We'll do 19 first, since that's in order. From Eastern Carolina, seeking to amend BCO 57 to revise the membership vows, which even just that alone makes me kind of grimace a little bit, to amend the membership vows. But let's get into it. So, adding an entire new first vow for membership. Do you agree that you're made in the image of God and designed by God to glorify God and enjoy Him forever? So, turning it into 6 membership vows, basically adding Shorter Catechism 1 to the beginning, right? I mean, more or less. Do we like this? Do we not like this?
The argument in favor is that we want to ground the beginning of our theology and the beginning of our statements in creation and the good creation rather than in sin, which is where we start now. I don't disagree with that desire. I'm not sure the membership vows is where to do that, and in addition, as several have pointed out, the sessions have liberty to add to the membership vows within reason. As I understand it, they can't. Obviously, you can't take things away. I'm not sure that this provision is necessary.
Just Alex made me think of it to point out that it also adds some language to what would become what is currently question number 1 and currently question number 5. Do you acknowledge yourself to be both beloved and sinners in the sight of God? And then to question number 5 would change promise to study to promise to promote the purity and peace of the church. So, sorry, just to catch us up. My bad. Jared.
Yeah, there was a attempt to change the membership vows to add something that was explicitly Trinitarian before, which has come up before. If you have a member that's denying the Trinity, is that something that they had vowed to maintain or not? And we didn't pass that. I think implicitly question 1, 2, and 3 are Trinitarian, so it's implicitly in there. But we didn't add explicit Trinitarianism to the vows. I don't know that this is going to have much of a better chance to get in than that does. We don't want to mess with the vows unless there's a real need there that can be argued. So that's going to be the challenge of this.
Cool. That was 1933. So many things on my screen at one time. All right, here we go. Overture 33 from our friend Fred Greco, and seeks to amend BCO 57-2 regarding the examination of young persons for admission to sealing ordinances. Just going to point out that these, this is the third now, I think, in a row that we've looked at that is seeking to amend the constitutional part of our directory. Just interesting point of fact. So would add one sentence, a few lines to the end of 57.2. The examination shall include an evaluation of the young person's credible profession, the young person's understanding of the meaning of the supper, and the young person's understanding of the questions in BCO 57.5, which presently are only 5 questions and could become 6, I suppose. It's just seeking to regulate how we examine children coming to the table.
This is good advice. I think everybody should be doing this, evaluating credible profession. Do you understand the Lord's Supper? Do you understand the vows? Like these are the things that we do.
Yeah. Does it need to be constitutional?
Do you put it in the book and put that good advice in there?
Yeah. Okay, so we just did 19. I'm trying to keep track so I can keep up with myself. 19 and 33, and now, I think we can skip all of these unless y'all really want to talk about presbytery boundaries. So 2:17. I want to talk about that. So which one was withdrawn? I forget the numbers.
21.
21 was withdrawn. That was our presbytery withdrew it. Because, originally, there was a church on the far west side of our presbytery, Covenant Presbytery, that was going to move over into Hills and Plains because Fort Smith was just so far out of the way, it was impossible to get them to presbytery. They were going to join Hills and Plains, be a little closer. at our most recent presbytery meeting, like 10 days ago, we established a study committee to study multiplication of our presbytery. So they, at the same meeting, after we approved the study committee, the pastor from Fort Smith asked for us to rescind our overture for them to leave in order for them to see how the study committee goes and what we might do in terms of multiplication in the future, so that they might still be a part of course, I don't know if I'm sure I can say all this. Our long-term goal, of course, is to have Arkansas be their own presbytery. I don't know how the Hills and Plains parts of Arkansas feel about that, but I think that's probably the hope, is maybe we're going to have an Arkansas presbytery soon. We've been trying to plant churches, and we're getting to the point where maybe they could be self-sustaining. And so I thought that, anyway, kind of cool to see that happen and to see the growth. And it's encouraging that Arkansas's got some more Presbyterians in it, to the point now where we can have this conversation. So presbytery boundaries. Presbyteries can't change unless the GA approves it, and so 2, 17, 20, not 21, 36, 45, and 46 are all having to do with presbytery boundary changes. And it's nice to check all those off the list and to keep going. So let's talk about study committees. Everybody's favorite phrase. Overture number 3 to start with from Arizona. To erect an ad interim committee on Christian nationalism. Now, you guys, I don't have them joined up in front of me. You may tell me that there are a few that deal with the same kind of thing, and help me out.
There are 5. It's 3, 4, 47, 48, and 49 all effectively deal with Christian nationalism and church-state relations and kind of how all of that plays together somehow. 48 is the one asking for a pastoral letter, a committee to do a pastoral letter, which is both better and worse. Better in the sense that it'll be easier to pass. Worse in the sense that it's going to do less and is less likely to actually garner the kind of traction that it needs to deal with the issue. But yeah, those 5 are the ones that are all one way or another touching on that same topic of Christian nationalism or church and state relations and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. So do we want to, you guys want to take some time and talk about it or comment on these? I mean, I think generally people know how I feel about study committees. So
I agree that study committees, that we've done a lot of those in the last several years, well, last 10 years really. And as such, it's a steep hill to climb to get another one approved. Mm-hmm. That said, the problem of how do we as believers, how do we as a church interact with the state and expect the state to interact with us has become a live issue in the last few years. I don't know how much it's affecting members in the pews everywhere, but I've seen it affecting members in the pews. I've seen it even more affecting officers, particularly online, unfortunately. But this is a live issue, and it's a thing where it would benefit the church to have some clarity. Assuming the moderator can find 7 men who well represent the ends of the spectrum and therefore can gain credibility with the different opinions, the folks who hold those different views, I think this could be a really beneficial thing to have some version of a committee. Personally, I think of the 5 that are before us, I think Overture 4 is probably the best version of it, probably with some amendments, but I think some version of Overture of ad interim committee touching on Christian nationalism would be beneficial.
Yeah, there's such a diversity in the Reformed tradition of church-state relations. Establishmentarianism is even in some churches that we have good relationships with. The RPCNA, the Free Church of Scotland, I think, still in principle is establishmentarian. So there's that issue, but then there's also the ethno-nationalist issue. I think the ethno-nationalist issue is the bigger issue that I think you can have a variety of ideas of church-state relations within the PCA, but not of the idea of, I don't know, so certain things that are attached to ethnic groups and to deny our unity that we have in Christ and in Adam. And so, yeah, the question really is, how do you get down to that? Is it the pastoral letter? Is it a study committee on it? Is it passing around? I thought Kevin DeYoung had a good article that was reviewing Stephen Wolf's book. Got into some of those questions there too. So it's a real issue. It's just how are we going to deal with it? Study committee has the problems of all of the study committees this year is how you fund it. So that may be actually what's debated more than the substance of it.
In some ways, I think the funding is the easiest portion, because if you look, a number of these presbyteries that have put this forward have promised a certain amount of funds. And from what just the short back of the napkin math, it seemed like there's sufficient promised from the sending presbyteries to cover the entire study committee, $15,000 a year or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was 9,500, and they were looking for 10,000,
you add them together,
or at least some of them. So, I tend to. I'm still. It is a serious issue. I wonder how faddish the issue is, and if it's sustainable. My gut is that the Christian nationalist movement currently is unsustainable, and it will flicker away. That's kind of how I see it. In due time, it doesn't have the weight to support itself, and so in 5 years from now, like many fads, it will be gone. That's my gut. I know that, but I'm not in a church that has had much significant influence. I know it has hurt many churches in the PCA, and I know there's been church splits because of it. And so I'm not discounting that. I know there's been real pain. I just wonder how sustainable the movement is. My gut is that it's not sustainable, but that's just me.
Yeah, we've seen it some at play, not at any large degree like I know some other churches have, but it has, for the most part, trickled. Guys have just kind of either they lose interest or they become disillusioned by watching the big names in it. They kind of see after a while like, oh, I don't think I'm interested in going that way.
I think the fact that it's faddish is not necessarily a bar from us speaking to it. I'm looking down the list of study reports that we have already that we've received in the past, and there are several that I think we would classify as fads now, but they're fads that passed in part because we spoke to them.
Yeah.
Things that were a flash in the pan and really nobody's talking about anymore, which is great. But we made our position clear on the issue, and that allowed it to be, ushered on along much more quickly. And I think that's the category that this falls into.
Now, your document actually grouped a different study committee in there, the AI one.
So yeah, we don't want to overlook that one.
Yeah.
I don't want my robot overlord to get mad at me for ignoring Overture 49 from Pacific Northwest to erect an ad interim committee on artificial intelligence. Interestingly, another one that was sent to all of the permanent committees is what it looks like. So, Scott, what did the AC think of this one? I know it's just because of the money, right?
Sorry, we have no comment until our June 5th meeting after this publishes, and so I'm not going to record it. You'll just have to read for yourself.
I know June 5th is before
actually,
this
I know
publishes.
It's advice.
Y'all are meeting before we publish.
I actually know what our advice is as a prophet. It's going to be the same advice we probably gave to all the other ones. Maybe a little more, I guess. I don't know. I'm guessing they're going to say funding, 2/3 RAO.
Did I hear right that Ridgehaven's advice in response to all these overtures is just the same for everyone, which is get off my lawn? Did I get that right? No? Okay. I mean, I'll jump in. Like, I make use of different versions of AI for different things in different parts of my life, and I would appreciate knowing, what people think about it. I don't know if I want that from a PCA study committee, but I can appreciate the interest and the recognition that this is a significant issue. We've struggled with plagiarism and issues with ordinands coming for exams in our presbytery in the past, and this is only going to add to that kind of thing, not just for exams for ordinands, but across the board in education. And so I do think it's worth knowing about and being aware of. I don't know what I feel about a study committee.
You should have some knowledge of this because it'll be an issue just in pastoral counseling more broadly than just pastoral candidates, but people who work in your church. So this is a real issue. I was actually kind of surprised. I think it was unanimous at Pacific Northwest that this is going to be a problem in the future to get a handle on. So even if it's not a study committee, you probably should pick up some books on this and start thinking about pastoral counseling for people that are going to deal with this, and then how do you deal with it in the courts of the church.
I mean, I'm not take this for what it's worth. Tony Reinke just he's done a lot of study and writing on technology. He works for Desiring God. He has a lecture he gave at Phoenix Seminary just a couple weeks ago now. Excellent treatment of AI and the preacher. So for any of you listening, go look that up. You can find it pretty easy online. Very, very helpful in considering the reality that we have to keep personality was his main thing in all of this. While AI can do a lot of those things, and because our theology makes sense, it can actually be right a lot of the times. We have to be careful when making use of it. All right. Y'all okay? Let's go on to, hold on, gotta navigate back. Number 11 of the overture. So that we dealt with study committees, advisory committees. Number 11 is an overture from South Texas to study incorporating Bitcoin into session Presbytery Committee and agency balance sheets. Did I miscategorize? Is this one another study committee?
This is another study.
Okay. Oh, never mind. We're still in a whole. I've got a big section of study committees. There was one. Yeah.
It's not a separate committee. It's for the agencies to study.
Yeah, to which agencies will respond. We have enough to do, and we don't need to do this. Is that the way it's going to be?
Well, I think PCA Foundation could probably give us some good counsel on this, and that's I think what AC says to do. And so maybe it's just sent just to them.
Haven't we dealt with this on the GA floor before? Bitcoin.
No.
I feel like somebody got up and talked about Bitcoin a couple years ago.
You're conflating two different ideas here. The what we've dealt with on the GA floor, and perhaps what we might continue to deal with, is how does one receive Bitcoin as a donation? This is not that. This is more investing and what it looks like to invest as agencies, churches, etc. And so one is dealing with investing, one is dealing with receiving. There is no negative advice to receiving Bitcoin. We actually need RBIs and Geneva benefits. We need their advice on how to receive it and how to manage it once we receive it. But this is a little more proactive in the idea of Bitcoin itself and as an investment, and to which they actually say, no, it's not a good idea to invest in. That's what I think Geneva Benefits says in their recommendation, that it doesn't rise to the level of credibility or something like that, some formal business speak that I don't understand, that they are better at explaining. But it's not a wise thing to invest in. That's basically their advice to the overture.
But I was right that somebody has said Bitcoin on the floor of the General Assembly before, right? I mean, that has
You're correct about
happened.
that.
That's the
I just wanted to make
my
sure.
recollection.
Yeah, we on the AC. This is perhaps maybe helpful. Like we on the AC, there was a ministry that was asking to be an exhibitor on our floor that was dealing with Bitcoin, and at first we were like, well, if we're saying no to this overture, should we also say no to them? But when we were looking at the ministry, it was how do you manage Bitcoin donations? I'm like, well, we already do that, so it's okay. So we can invite them. They're not encouraging people to spend their money in Bitcoin and invest. They're saying how can we help service churches who receive this sort of donation? And so they will be here.
I'm glad you're here, Scott.
Yeah. I'm alive.
So another one, 27, Overture 27 from Northwest Georgia. Erect ad interim committee to receive suggestions for permanent committee and agency operations, resources, and expenses. Is the title. We've got it up there. The therefore clause down here, we request the 52nd General Assembly to approve an ad interim committee on operations, resources, expenses, with said committee tasked to solicit and receive any recommendations for improvement, optimization, greater transparency from the lower courts for all funded GA works, which shall then be collated, evaluated, and reported on its website directly to the 53rd Assembly as well. And there's some more language there about funding. Is okay. I really forgive my thing. I've heard people talking about it. Is this the Doge overture that people have been talking about? Is that what they mean when they say that? Is this particular one? Okay. So I see Alex nodding or shaking his head. So I'm gonna ask him what he thinks about this one.
I'm not a fan for a whole variety of reasons, not least because it's just an administrative nightmare. What is the committee supposed to do with all these recommendations? Do we just have a pile of little Post-it notes with recommendations on it to hand to the AC at next GA? I mean, what do we do with this? This is not a good way to think through. Okay, so there's been question, are we efficiently managing the resources that we have, both human resources, financial resources, whatever? Obviously, that's a question that's worth asking. This is not how you get there. This is not how you go about figuring that out.
Yeah. Well, I think it was interesting the AC said either negative or refer back, because there's something there. There's a good idea there of, I'm sure if you can have some sort of a comment box that has ideas to save money, that's a good thing. Do we need to pay for a separate committee that's doing this? I don't think. Well, there's my opinion. I don't necessarily think so. Although it would be nice if you assign somebody in AC to collect these things and to do things like that. There's some good people in AC that could do that. Scott, yeah,
please.
He's not doing anything.
Spare me of all pain and misery. I think it was referred to the 53rd General Assembly, if I recall my advice, the AC's advice, I should say. We debated it, and it was either negative or refer to the next assembly, and I think they decided on refer next, or do either or. I don't really care either way. My inner Ron Paul comes out. You see that? I don't care either way. It just keeps happening. Where it's like we must make government larger to make it smaller. That just it hurts the libertarian part of me.
All right, are we still on together? I lost connection there for a second. I think I'm back. Yeah. Okay. I could hear y'all. I think I was frozen up. Yeah, but it seems like y'all were talking.
I think we're good to move on to 35.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do. I love it. Overture 35 from Pacific Northwest, requesting the AC to study and report on GA meeting locations. Yeah, there are numbers in this overture, so that's cool.
This is a very wise overture.
Interestingly, so we're going to be in Chattanooga this year, and Louisville next year, and Milwaukee the year after that, right? So
I had a conversation with somebody in AC that is on staff that does these things, and there's really good reasons for the places that are picked and that are selected. And so I don't think it's necessarily something that they're unaware of that they need to study, but maybe just putting it into a report and letting everybody know about it is a good idea.
Part of the benefit there, a huge part of the benefit, is getting that information public to everybody at the assembly. Not that everybody's going to read it, but hopefully they will. It has been a source of consistent amusement to me that we have the GA in the South and then GA not in the South. Well, the not in the South locations have been places like Memphis and Louisville. I'm sorry, that is the South. Come on now.
Milwaukee's coming up,
and I'm excited about that. But I'd love to see us, get west of the Mississippi, not in Texas. We've done Texas, that's great, but that's the only place we've gone west of the Mississippi, other than Memphis, which doesn't count. I'd love to see better awareness of the categories that are needed to make that decision, to be able to say, okay, well, this is what it takes to be able to host a General Assembly and why this is the decisions that they are. I think this is a great idea.
Yeah, well, there are a myriad of reasons. It's really hard to plan these things. Some locations just don't want you because you're a church affiliated group. Like we don't want a denomination that in our city. That's too controversial. But now our assembly is at a weird middling age or size where we are too large for where we used to go, but too small to go to the actual convention cities because we can't financially make it work. And so we're in between a rock and a hard place in our current size. And that has put us into us not having the best bargaining, but also we are barely making even on our assemblies. And one hiccup and an assembly can be really jeopardized. And so what I mean by that is that we need 2,000 commissioners to break even at every assembly. And our assemblies have gotten larger, right? The last 5 years, they've been 2,000 on average. But say something goes quiet or dormant, or we choose a location that's not as popular, and so people don't want to travel all the way over there, and so now we go under 2,000. Well, that means we're going to be in the red. And so there needs to be, in my opinion, and why this is a good overture, there needs to be a greater study on how to stabilize. Because in my mind, our current pattern is not sustainable. We need something that can be replicated without much risk to the denomination. And that might mean being more static and maybe even less diverse. I don't know. Like, it just depends how the research goes. But right now it's like, oh no, maybe Milwaukee we go under because of the nature of being out of the South, or maybe it's fine. But it's really, there's a lot of liability in the current structure that we have. Dixie, who's the business administrator, is a fantastic woman, and she is very helpful in this matter. And I hope that this passes, and I hope that we can have a little more R&D with just not her doing all this, but perhaps a larger group trying to plan this.
And that would not be an official study committee of the GA. That's just asking the AC to do the work, right, Scott?
Yeah, maybe that's what we should always do. We should just ask the AC or some group that's already a group to study everything. Charge the AC to...
That's what we do in Ascension.
Charge the AC to study Christian nationalism. Solved.
Well, I know he's going to have to slip off in a second, so since we're in a pause, I just want to say thanks again to Alex for being with us. We appreciate it. It looks like you made it through most of the substantive stuff with us. We're about to get into kind of just, some periphery things, so appreciate you.
Do you have one of those you want to say something about
else
that's left?
I will leave by dropping a bomb.
Yes.
Overture 50, I think should be an absolute slam dunk. This is, Christian care for immigrants, regardless of documentation status, is the short version of that overture. That should be a slam dunk for the churches are to care for immigrants, regardless of how they got here and who they are and whatever. It won't be for a whole variety of reasons. But I think it should pass, and it's something that we absolutely should do.
Well, this is almost a alternative to what M&A was saying with legal advice. Well, this is pastoral advice. You don't need to get into church-state relations to say you should have a pastoral mind for this. I think it's partly what that's trying to do, right?
I think that's the key, is that it's not trying to say, as a denomination, we encourage you to violate the law, whatever. We're not doing that. But for your churches, as you're in whatever area you're in, you're going to encounter immigrants. Whether they're legal immigrants or undocumented or whatever you want to call, whatever category they fall into, these are the people that God has put in your neighborhood. Care for them. It's not your job to enforce the government's immigration laws. It's your job to care for the people that God has put in your lap. And I think, as I say, I think this should be a slam dunk. I expect it probably won't pass for a variety of good and less good reasons, but this should be just no question. Let's go. And with that, I have to bow. I gotta go get.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
All right. I was wondering what was going to happen when he did that, but I think when he left, I was wondering what was going to happen when he left. So I think it's okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, it's just the three of us again.
That kind of relates to 28, though, which is the overture that asked M&A to issue an apology for the recommendation and to dismiss anybody who was involved with giving those recommendations on legal help. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. That it seems rather extreme in terms of directing what the committee needs to do. But that's out there, and I think 50 is meant to be an alternative to that.
Okay. Well, good. So let's. I've got some sense of order for the rest of these. We've got some administrative matters. There's some communication stuff, and then there's some SJC and process things that we'll hit in a minute. So let's just kind of work our way through It might seem a little random, but let's just go to 18 to start with. Overture 18 from Gulf Coast Presbytery directs RUF to update campus ministry manual for GA approval. The context of this, of course, is recent years there were matters concerning the RUF policy manual and their affiliation agreements, which have been, in process and being updated and things. And I'm sure that this is just a response to that. I seem to recall somebody writing, maybe it was in one of the documents, that this is just too large to ask for. Does that sound right to y'all, or maybe I don't recall?
Well, the question is the 1979 that's referred to in there accurate, or is this already being revised by RUF? So I think we probably need to hear from RUF before we know how this is going to shake out at General Assembly of what their current manual is, and if they have a response for why not to do this, because they say no.
They say no.
Okay. They do. Well, that's something we should note. RUF says no to Overture 18. Okay, well, not much to say then. Overture 34 is from Savannah River, amending RAO 16 to require reporting on session and diaconate membership and duties. Adding a section down here to RAO 16 4C1 that says that the presbytery should include a list of persons who compromise the session and the diaconate of each church arranged by their ordained or given titles, and if no diaconate exists, to report why it has not been established and whether or not the duties have developed upon the ruling elders, unordained diaconal assistants, or any other committee or member of the church. Again, this has some context in recent debates over the last few years related to ordained and unordained people and titles and work. And
I think this is meant to be a prompt to have the session reporting who is doing their diaconal duties, because the BCO tells you that if the deacons aren't doing it, it dissolves to the session. Although some people have set up a non-ordained quasi-diaconate that has unordained people in it. And so I think it's trying to get to that. The CCB has some questions about whether or not it's asking certain questions that are already, the answer is supposed to be, it's supposed to go to the session. And then there's also a question of is the GA is asking a court to report to another court, and so it gets a little bit into the weeds there. But so the question there is just dealing with CCB's question of the questions that are being asked. They're already supposed to be done by the BCO, so give advice rather than ask the question would be the way to, I think, to resolve that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And let's see. Let's jump to 41 from Calvary, directing the AC to collect and report each congregation's public worship service times and to attach them on the directory map that's at pcaac.org. I'll comment on this one to start with. I've gone on there to look around for churches when we're traveling, to find somewhere to worship. Generally speaking, if you're going to get a hold of a church to get their worship times from them, they also have a website, which generally speaking is linked on the PCA website already. So while I'm not one to poo-poo on even just a simple thing like this, I don't know if it's really necessary. The churches that are not going to respond to this probably don't have websites, and you're not going to find it anyway. It's the 21st century, folks. Look around on the internet. But y'all may disagree, and you probably do.
The RPCNA does this on their website, but the RPCNA has a few less churches than we do.
Yeah. Hey, maybe an idea for an entire new PCA-based podcast where every episode is just a couple of guys trying to find the worship times for the churches in the PCA. And over the course of 12 years, this will be accomplished. Any takers? Listeners, if you're interested, get in touch with me. I can help produce that podcast. We'll make it happen. I think it would be listened to by a couple of people. So, maybe, and most certainly people from Calvary Presbytery. So, all right. Let's. I hope I'm not making fun of Mel when I made all those jokes just now. That would be horrible.
31-2's coming.
What was that? 41? 42 Direct this from Calvary again. Direct the stated clerk not to collect statistical data pertaining to age or ethnicity. One of you guys who's more in the know is going to have to tell me what this is about. But basically, the resolved at the bottom says, Calvary Presbytery hereby overtures the 52nd General Assembly to direct the office of the stated clerk through the administrative committee not to collect statistical data pertaining to age or ethnicity in annual statistical reports. I guess the question is the stated clerk collecting this kind of data? And why should we tell him to stop?
The state clerk is not currently collecting this data. This is a provision that will be implemented over the next year that was made aware when they were collecting data this year. And so this year they said next year we're going to collect data on race and ethnicity. And so there had been wind of it, and for that reason Calvary had given us a pair of overtures that are dealing with perhaps not collecting that data.
So is that also Overture 43, amending regarding data on
right.
age and ethnicity? Yeah. So we've got the pair, is what Scott referred to. I mean, Scott, is there anything you can give us from the AC in terms of y'all's thoughts on this, or has this been since your last meeting?
No, we answered. We think no on both of these. The rationale is in there. I don't. Yeah. I feel strongly. I was about to say I don't really feel strong. Have strong feelings about this. Yeah, there.
When you say rationales in there, you're talking about the commissioner's handbook where y'all's report is found.
Yeah,
okay.
It's substantial enough. My question perhaps is the greater idea of selective choice of what we gather. I probably have an issue, just a general issue, like why aren't we collecting gender data? If we're going to collect age and ethnicity, why not gender? I mean, I think gender would come before age and ethnicity. But for some reason we don't collect that, but we want to start collecting this. And that's perhaps where if this was just all encompassing, it'd probably be less discussed. But because there's a selective nature of it, it probably creates more debate. I think you either keep it how it is or you just collect everything. That's kind of my position personally. Don't be selective of what you collect. Just collect everything or keep it how it is, rather than selectively choosing certain data points.
Yeah. Cool. We did those. I'm running through my list, and I'm seeing that we've dealt with some of these as we've worked our way through. Let's jump to...
I think 44 would be next, right?
Yeah, did we already handle 28? Yeah, you addressed 28. Yeah, 44. Thank you, Jared. 44 from PD Presbytery, transition by faith to a press release-based publication. Several points in their resolved statements at the bottom that they limit the types of content that by faith publishes to official press releases from the AC and other agencies regarding actions taken by GA, initiatives, denominational decisions, ministry updates from PCA churches, presbyteries, and agencies, highlighting the work of the church in missions, discipleship, and service, as well as announcements and reports from the GA and presbyteries ensuring transparency and accessibility of denominational proceedings. I guess the context of this one is that in recent months we've seen other types of things coming from By Faith, particularly more recent months, and over the years, different types of articles and things. Between me and y'all, and I guess this is, and many people that are listening, I've never understood the precise purpose of By Faith in terms of what kinds of things they would release, because it seems like there's all sorts of stuff coming out of By Faith. So my personal thought is that I'm agreeable to this. I think having some set standards is wise, and maybe they exist, and this would just be narrowing them. But as a TE who's been around for a little while at least, I've never known what the purpose of By Faith was in terms of their directives, I guess. So y'all come at me.
Yeah, I think it's grown over the years. I mean, you have more editorial comments, you have devotionals that'll come out of there, you have news announcements. And so I think because there had been some things about that churches aren't united on, COVID response or political issues like January 6th or, what sorts of press releases. There are some press releases that dealt with the character of elders that you're kind of like, is this what I want to read in the denominational paper? So that's why I think it's come up. It's just whether or not this is narrowing too much or Yeah, and that'll be for OC and GA to decide.
Could we devise just a by faith GPT that would just publish stuff on its own without anybody having to run it? All we're looking at is server costs, which are probably minimal in the long run. Just get an Apple Mac Mini and stick it in Lawrenceville somewhere and have it run a publication arm. All right. Well, you heard it here first. So if it happens, I'm going to claim that.
AI replacing
28, 40,
faith. Terrible, man.
I've got 2 left on my list. Maybe that's what the AI study committee can recommend. Overture 9. I should probably flip to it so I can tell you what it is. There it is. From James River. Again, another one sent to a lot of different people. Amending BCO 14 to make AC members appointed by committees and agencies non-voting advisory members. So we should probably rehearse a little bit. Folks don't remember BCO 14 from when we covered it back in the day. But presently, constituted in BCO 14 and REO 5, the Administrative Committee consists of 11 members elected at large by the General Assembly, as well as 9 members appointed by the permanent committees and agencies, which means that the AC is 20 members, 9 of whom are appointed by permanent committee members and agencies not elected by the General Assembly. They point out here that it means that 45% of the votes on the AC are cast by men appointed to the committee rather than elected to the committee, and they're seeking to remove their voting privileges. Still have the privilege of the floor, and I think it also excludes them when an executive session is called as well. So, Scott, I don't know how much you want to get into this. You're a member of the administrative committee, but maybe one of you guys wants to help us.
I don't
just
want
think
to help
through the
you.
different aspects. Yeah, you don't want to help. Jared, what are the different things we should consider on this one, or that's worth looking at? Yeah.
Yeah, the thought here is to have the AC run by those who are elected by the GA rather than those that are appointed by the committees. In some ways, it's having right now you have oversight that's almost half the committee that comes from the people or those agencies that they're overseeing. So there may be a little bit of a conflict there. The pushback to that is, well, through the AC comes budget proposals, so we want to have the people that are there represent them at those budget proposals. I think probably the pushback on that, again, would be they vote on a whole lot more than budget proposals on the AC. So they're in the room for all these other discussions, whether it's staffing of AC or anything else that the AC does. So that's really going to be the back and forth there of do we want to have more direct oversight just from the GA on AC or role of the permanent committees and having voting members that are going there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one more. Just one more for us to look at, and that is Overture 29 from Houston Metro, amending BCO 15 to clarify the handling of an SJC minority decision by the General Assembly. These kinds of overtures make me dizzy. I just,
Well, I think one of the biggest parts of this, I don't know if Scott wants to jump in on this, but is we've never had a minority report that has been done by the SJC. And the things that are required in order to do that are very expensive, such as sending out all of the record of the case. And it seems to imply the sending out of all of that information is physical. So I think this might have actually come from the SJC could have had a minority report this year. But when they looked at the process for this, it said, we would be costing the denomination tens of thousands of dollars to have a minority report. And if you can do this electronically, then you can actually do it. So right now, the way that it's written, it may not be possible to do a minority report without large expense. And this would make it, you're able to actually do a minority report without physically mailing out all of the information. So I think this is coming from the SJC to say, like, if we ever want to actually use this provision, we need to have a changing of how we would get the information out.
See, this is why I like having Jared around, because he can explain things, like we're very, under 18, just to pick an arbitrary number, and understand it. So thank you. Appreciate that. Well, guys, we did it. We're under 2 hours and 10 minutes. I'm thinking of releasing this in one long episode, I think.
With only the loss of one member.
That's true.
Of our
We only
group
lost
here.
one guy along the way. That's only a 25% You know, I've been watching all of the other PCA podcasts have Overture episodes way too early, in my opinion. But I think we're the only one that can say that we have dealt with every single Overture in one singular episode. And if Polity Matters is for anything, isn't it for that? So, you guys have any closing words about any of this that you'd like to contribute? Or here, I tell you what, let's just say that as Overture 51 would say, if it existed, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. Our great thanks to our friend Alex Ford for joining us today. I appreciate Alex coming on because he and I don't interact on a regular basis during the year, but when Overtures come around, I always value hearing what he has to say about them, and it helps me think about them in a fresh way that I might not normally consider. Listeners, as you know, if you're interested in learning what we've talked about, you can check out the show notes. There probably won't be a lot down there this time, aside from a link maybe to the Overtures. And remember, I will have chapter markers, which you may have already found, and if not, you can use those when you come back as you think forward about General Assembly. If you've enjoyed the show, do consider following us on social media at Polity Matters, and be sure to be subscribed in your podcast app of choice. If you have comments or questions, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. If you're a supporter and you haven't heard from me, please get in touch and let me know what your t-shirt size is, and we will try to hold one for you when we're at General Assembly. If you're a supporter, I might even mail you one if you're not going to be in Chattanooga. There's a link below where you can support our work and get secure a t-shirt for next year. Hopefully we'll try to do this every year now. I've just been really glad to go through this whole thing and super excited to have some like wearable merch out there. It's gonna be kind of cool. Anyway, all of that to say, thank you for spending time with us. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Bye.
Goodbye, gentlemen.
Y'all take care.